Yesterday the budget was presented by the Union Finance Minister, and over the last several years, several decades, we've been hearing about numbers from every finance minister, every prime minister, every chief minister, every government representative on various forums. We've been hearing about how India is a compelling business opportunity. We've been hearing about how the world is looking at India, etc., etc. Before I talk about numbers, let me quickly give you a little bit of perspective, from being in politics and public life for the last 17 years. I was also a part of the private sector for about 7.5, 8 years in the US and also for some time in India as well. The one thing I've realized, both in public life and also when I was in the corporate sector, is that the biggest challenge for a leader, irrespective of who it is and what they run, at what institution they head. It could be a government headed in a state by a chief minister. It could be a government headed in a country by a prime minister or a president. Or it could be a corporate entity headed by a chief executive officer. The biggest challenge for any leader across the world is not wealth management or capital management. It actually is people management. Because the best of the people, in fact, deliver the goods and basically make an enterprise or an institution or an entity successful. That's a fact. Now, the case in point, I'd like to narrate a quick story. We always measure our economies in terms of trillions. We hear terms such as GDP, the gross domestic product, the gross state domestic product. We also hear terms such as per capita, etc., etc. But in my humble opinion, and without having to, I hope I'm not offending anybody when I say this, I think sometimes these can be misleading. The numbers, especially when it comes to numbers, it can be misleading. Because if you think about it for a minute, by virtue of our size as a nation, we are a 1.4 billion nation. We are, in fact, as of last week, if I am correct, we have recently surpassed China, and we are the most populous nation in the world today. So by sheer virtue of the size of our people, the size of our country, the population, the economy looks big. It is about $3.4 trillion now. But if you look at the per capita, by GDP, by economy, we're the 5th largest in the world. But if you look at per capita, we're actually the 142nd country in the world by per capita. Our per capita is only 2,400 USD. So the real measure, if you ask me, how does one understand the trillions of dollars of economy that is being talked about? How does one balance GDP and wealth? Now, for those of you who are wondering, what is the difference between GDP and wealth? If you ask me, GDP is a reflection, gross state domestic product, the 5 trillion, the 10 trillion dollars, etc., are a reflection of the economic activity of a nation. It could be in the previous year, or GDP forecast could be about economic activity that is likely to unfold in the next quarter, in the next couple of quarters, or next 1 year, etc., etc. But what is the wealth of a nation? The wealth of a nation is actually a collection, as a combination of its assets, both natural resources, its human resources, and how they are likely to influence the economic activity over a longer term. How the depreciation of these assets, these resources, the depletion of these resources, and how the utilization of these resources is intricately linked to ensuring long-term sustainable growth in line with the developmental aspirations of that particular nation. So, let me not confuse you, without giving you examples. I'll give you 2 examples. Back in 1987, China and India, exactly 35 years ago, 2 countries with similar size of human resources, had the exact same size of GDP, 1987. But if you actually now move 35 years ahead and look at the current times and current date, China's economy is almost at $18 trillion. and we are languishing at $3.4 trillion. China's per capita is 13,000 US dollars. Our per capita is 2,400 US dollars. So what am I talking about here? What did China do that India didn't in the last 35 years? In my humble opinion, if I have to sum it up properly in one single line, I think China managed its aspirations, its developmental goals, and ensured that the natural resources and human resources were put to good effective use and has competed with the West and the best in the world to ensure it reached where it is. But even China has a long way to go if you look at the size of the economy versus the size of the people. Huge difference.